Hold on just a second. We got technical problems.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Alvarado,
Present in the room.
Senator Harper Angel,
Present remotely in the district.
thank you. Senator McDaniel, Senator McGarvey,
Present remotely in the district.
thank you. Senator Nemes,
Present in the room.
Senator Schroeder,
Present remotely in the district.
thank you. Senator Southworth, Senator Storm,
Present in the room.
Senator Thayer,
Here in the room.
Senator Wheeler, Representative Blanton,
Present in the room.
Representative Bowling,
Here in the room.
Representative Cantrell, Representative Decker,
Present in the room.
Representative Duplessis,
Present in Frankfurt.
thank you. Representative Fisher,
Present remotely in my district.
thank you. Representative Flood, Representative Gooch,
Present remotely from my district.
thank you. Representative Graham, Representative Heath,
Good, how are you?
Present in the room.
Representative Heverin,
Present in the room.
Representative Imes,
Present in my district.
thank you. Representative Johnson,
Present in the room.
Representative Cook,
Here in the room.
Representative Derek Lewis, Representative Scott Lewis, Representative Maddox,
Present in the room.
Representative Meeks,
Present in my office.
thank you. Representative Mentor,
Present in District 20.
thank you. Representative Moser,
I'm here in the room.
He's here in the room.
oh, thank you. Representative Nemes, Representative Scott,
Present in District 41.
thank you. Representative Smith, Representative Stevenson, Representative Tate,
Present in the room.
Representative Tipton,
Present in the room.
Representative Upchurch,
Present in the room.
Representative Weber, Representative Wheatley,
Here in the room.
Representative Bratcher,
Here in the room.
Representative Miller,
Here in the room.
Senator Mills.
I'm here in the room. And Senator Southworth is here. She walked in. Okay, we have some minutes to approve. We have the minutes from October 19th meeting. Is there a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye. Aye. The minutes are approved. Before we get started, Representative Smith has a guest he would like to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's with honor that I can introduce you to a close friend of mine and known probably by most of you as Bob Mitchell from Congressman Hal Rogers' office. He was his chief of staff for 34 years and now mainly his advisor, but it's a privilege to have him in the room today. And Bob, if you'll stand up, we'll welcome you to our committee.
Thank you. Good to have you, sir. Any other guests before we get started? Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much. Our agenda, we've added the ARPA funding discussion to our agenda to help get a clear understanding of why certain ARPA capital project fund appropriations have recently been rescinded. We have First, though, I'd like to get kind of a school's view of this, and we have with us today Mr. Stephen Evans, who is the Bath County Superintendent. Mr. Evans' school was one of the 13 schools that were included in this funding that we're addressing today. And so, Mr. Evans, if you'd like to just kind of give us some background a little bit on the school and then how you've been proceeding over the last 8 to 9 months how you were planning on spending the money and what's gone on. Specifically, if you could give us some background on communications that you've had with state government or the administration to help us have more of a clear view of what's gone on recently.
Thank you, Senator Mills. Thank you all for having me here today. It's first time I've sat in a chair like this, so if I break any decorum, just let me know. But I am the first-year superintendent at Bath County Schools. I'm originally from central Kentucky, so my history of Bath County is a little limited, but we have a middle school that's over 100 years old. It had a renovation many, many years ago. It's a beautiful building. It's in the centerpiece of our downtown in Owensville. The community loves it. We could never do anything with that building. I was told very nicely, if you were to tear this building down, that it'd be the last day that you'd be in this district. They love it so, and so it's a beautiful old building. When I arrived, it was our district facilities plan we were looking to build a new facility and renovate that for some alternative means, but we don't have the bonding capacity to do that. And so when these funds came forward, Bath County received $7.1 million. Our district building has over $12 million in needed renovations, air conditioning, flooring. We have some mold in our basement. We have a large band room that's many, many years old that was subfloor below ground that we can't use that room. It's probably as big as this room here. So that $7.1 million occurred. So we changed our district facilities plan. That was a lengthy process, had a local planning committee meeting and changed it from new build to renovation based on the $7.1 million that we were receiving in our bonding capacity. We were told to wait. Something was up. There'd be like a 90-day or 60-day moratorium on that. When that time had passed, we were asked 2 weeks later, 2 weeks, we'll let you know something 2 weeks, we'll let you know something 2 weeks. And eventually there was a Zoom meeting that was called. My facilities director, Dr. Melton, and my finance director, Ms. Combs, attended that. I was at a required training I had to have for a first-year superintendent. They came back and they informed me on there that the funding was gone. The reasoning behind that was the ARP funding was designed more for buildings that are community buildings, not school buildings. And so a letter was sent within the week stating that that funding, they apologized, funding's gone, but if we could do something during the regular session here, that they would attempt to do that. So.
Very good. Along the way of, did you feel like that this money was promised, or was it clearly communicated that it was subject to the federal guidance, or how was that communicated?
Well, our understanding that it was our money. It was given and it was communicated. So that's why we went through the process of changing our district facilities plan from new build to renovation.
So it was a surprise to you when you found out that it was no longer available?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay. Are there? Representative Cook has a question for you.
Good afternoon, and this isn't much question, it is a comment. Sure. Taking the tour of that Bath County Middle School, which is one of the oldest in the state, and I don't know that any school district has ever had to do more with less to keep that system up and running. And their custodial staff, they have done an amazing job up in there working, patching things, keeping the whole thing together. And that building is a staple of the community because everybody in Bath County has gone to school there at some point. It's very hard to find somebody that didn't attend school there. But if you want to talk about it being an issue of health, you've got a 100-year-old building. You've got plaster crumbling in some areas. You got downstairs with the mold. I don't know how that you can expect, without proper ventilation, to go in there and be able to sanitize one of those rooms if you're going to go spray down. If you have porous wall, you've got holes in it and everything else, and you've got to come in there and spray it. And I really think the administration needs to take a second look at this, because this is very much a health issue, and it's very much what these CARES monies were intended for, in my opinion. So thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And we have you mentioned it. We have a great facilities director. We have great people, and I in no way want to draw a picture of our building that would look down upon them. But the things that you say are absolutely accurate. We do have issues, like I said, the mold. We're doing our best to abate all that and take care, make sure our kids are safe, and we do a good job of that. But that facility is beyond normal upkeep and repair. Major renovations necessary to keep it going.
Representative McCormick has a question online. Are you unmuted?
Now I am.
There you go.
I do not have a question. I did not hear my name called, so I raised my hand to let them know that I was online with you guys.
Very good. Thank you so much. Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Superintendent, over here to your right.
Yes, sir.
Here. So my understanding, you all had looked at, and it was going to be around $12 million for what you really needed, but you had to go back and you had to basically redesign to make this 7.1 fit, and I'm assuming that come at a cost to you all?
Well, the 12 million includes the 7.1 plus some of our bonding capacity. We're also doing a high school renovation as well, and so.
But my question is, in order to do that, did you all have to pay out extra monies in this process to get to where the 7.1 would have worked for you?
Yes, sir.
And
yes,
what
sir.
did that cost your district?
Oh, previous already spent?
Making preparations for the 7.1 million that you were promised.
Well, I apologize. I can't tell you that number off the top of my head, but probably several $1,000s. But the architects and things like that. Most of this job was started before I took office in July 1, so I apologize for not having your
that's fine. I completely understand. The point I want to make is a commitment was made to you all.
Yes, sir.
You spent monies because of that commitment that you had to pay out of pocket, and then that commitment wasn't carried through, and now you're all just out that money. You just essentially threw it in the wind because you was doing what you were asked to do to be able to receive the funds that was committed to you.
Yes, sir. And then if you need those funds, I'll get those numbers when I go back, if you like.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Storm has a couple questions.
Superintendent, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for driving down. As it relates to the transition from a new build to a remodel, about when was that you all transitioned?
The process we just went through a couple months ago, within the last month. When I came in, they were already looking at that before I started. In June, they were talking about the renovation and had people looking at it. But once the 7.1 was what we thought was guaranteed, then we went through the process last month to reunite the facilities committee and bring it in and change that. It's some steps you have to go through to change your facilities plan from new to renovation.
And when was the first time you were notified that the funds would not be available?
About 2 weeks ago. They were put on, they said, let's put a hold on it. I think it was 60 days, but it could have been 90. And then after that, when that time limit was up, it kept being, we'll know something in 2 weeks. We'll know something 2 weeks. So it's been several months.
Thank you.
But 2 weeks ago is when I was notified. Yes, sir.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Superintendent. I appreciate you being here today. Government can be very frustrating. In our packet, we've received a response from the governor's office on this issue. Have you seen that document?
I received a letter, and I received I would say not a PowerPoint, but like a document from the federal government.
Sure.
It may be the same thing that you're referring to.
Now, you testified that you were not made aware that there might be an issue with the funding until like 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago is when we found out that it was not going to happen. Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read into the record part of the letter from the administration. It says the school, SFCC met on June 2nd, 2021, and voted to issue additional offers of support to 13 school districts implementing the appropriation made in House Bill 556. Recognizing that the final federal guidance had not yet been published, the offers of support were expressly conditioned on availability of the federal funds underlying the appropriations. The school districts were notified that there was no projection of when the federal funds might be received. 12 of the school districts accepted the tentative offers of assistance. Representatives of my administration and the staff of SFCC held a Zoom conference with leadership of the subject school districts on July 26, 2021. The school districts received an update on the status of the federal funding supporting the House Bill 556 appropriation. They were advised that the final federal guidance had not yet been published. Absent the guidance, it was uncertain as to when or if the federal funding would be available. The school districts were advised that given the uncertainty, it might be unwise to make any preliminary expenditures relating to the affected projects. So, based on your testimony, what you're saying is you were not aware of this possibility.
Sir. Well, no, when I came on, I was not aware of that.
Okay.
But we didn't start any construction based on the finalized once they start saying, let's hold off, let's put a moratorium.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to clarify that the administration is giving a different version of the accounts of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Evans? Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
If you don't mind hanging on here, we may have some additional questions here in a little bit, but thank you for coming. And the reason that I had Mr. Evans go first is just to give an example of what we are hearing and kind of the pushback that we are getting from constituents. Now, the main part of our meeting, we have online, we have State Budget Director John Hicks and Secretary Carrie Harvey. Gentlemen, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon, and thank you for your letter on Friday. We've all digested that and read that. If you could move forward and highlight your letter, your reply to us to help us have some more clarity in this issue, that is what we would like for you to do at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is John Hicks. Secretary Harvey and I really appreciate you asking us to come speak with you and the committee members today. We appreciate the opportunity to explain this situation with the $127 million in school projects, which we all fully expected to be eligible to be funded from the federal ARPA Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. As you just said, last Friday, the governor sent a full explanation in a response letter to President Stivers and Senator Osborne. Throughout these last number of months, the governor and the governor's office have had some regular and routine communication with the majority and minority leadership of both chambers on this topic. But most importantly today, we'll explain the governor's recommended solution to this issue, one that will meet the legislative intent for getting these projects done as planned, and one that provides no downside to any other element of the budget. A little bit of the backdrop to help you understand the context and the complexity of the situation. In March of 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed. It included two new programs for states, the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund, for which you all appropriated funds for broadband deployment, water and wastewater sewer infrastructure, and then the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. And it was, given the limited amount of days that were left in the 21 session, the governor and the General Assembly reviewed the legislative text together. We were all reading from the same new federal statute about the programs, and came up with an agreed upon recommendation to appropriate $127 million for urgent needs schools through the School Facilities Construction Commission, and $58 million for projects mostly dealing with the next phase of the Capitol buildings renovation. And so we were all looking at the same wording. And in fact, let me just quote, the federal statute for making payments to states to carry out critical capital projects directly enabling work education, and health monitoring. And so we were all looking at that and trying to figure out in a short period of time what are current needs here in the Commonwealth that might meet those tests. And we worked together with the General Assembly, to get the appropriations. And so at the time, the governor, right after you all enacted the budget and House Bill 556 and others, he appointed several members of his cabinet to lead some of these projects in implementation. For example, I was asked to help lead the broadband deployment project. Secretary Harvey, he was asked to lead, this project working with School Facilities Construction Commission and the Department of Ed. So showing the governor's priority on implementing these projects that the legislature had approved. And so then that process began, and Secretary Harvey will be able to recount that. But we got a foreshadowing of a problem related to those decisions in May of 2021 through what the U.S. Department of Treasury issued an unusual statement on purpose and process around the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. This was not official guidance, nor was it an interim rule or a final rule. And this statement indicated that the Capital Projects Fund nationally was targeted to increasing internet connectivity rather than capital projects that enabled work, education, and health monitoring. And in fact, it added the word jointly to those three elements. And so Governor then personally reached out and had a phone call with U.S. Department of Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the White House lead on the ARPA fund, Gene Sperling, and strongly expressed, his disagreement with kind of the targeting of that statement that had been put out and indicating and explaining the rationale that the legislature and the administration had come to in proposing $127 million in urgent needs school projects. And subsequently, I had a couple of conversations with the lead officials at the U.S. Department of Treasury, again explaining Kentucky's thinking behind why we did what we did in the budget process and how we thought it fit with the legislative text. And so there was strong encouragement that when the U.S. Treasury put out its final guidance, that it would incorporate, those kinds of thoughts from Kentucky and other states who were acting on those funds. And so to fast forward then and turn it over to Secretary Harvey, we did not receive federal guidance on the use of these funds until September 10th of 2021. They finally issued its guidance, 6 months later. And in part due to the governor's entreaties to the federal government officials, they did incorporate something beyond internet connectivity, and they called it a multi-purpose community facility projects in which those three elements, must be contained. And so right now, let me turn it over to Secretary Harvey, and he explained further some of the process and the timelines.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with the committee today. As John indicated, the governor asked me to work with the School Facilities Construction Commission to implement this particular portion of House Bill 556. And I've had the opportunity to work particularly closely with the School Facilities Construction Commission staff during this process, and I do want to compliment that staff. There's only two of them, but they're very talented and they work very hard, and they've been really good people to work with. As we went about this business, we identified the necessary steps to implement the General Assembly's appropriation, and just to make sure that we're clear on what that appropriation did, it's probably important to talk in a little bit of detail about how 556 worked. House Bill 556 mandated that offers of assistance were to be made to fund projects that were ranked the highest on the Kentucky Facilities Inventory and Classification Report, has that report existed on February 27, 2020. And so that's an important fact to note, because these were House Bill 556, as it was passed by the General Assembly, did not contemplate that new projects not then in existence would be funded. The way House Bill 556 was to work, it was to provide gap funding in order for districts to actually build projects that were already on the drawing board, that were already prioritized as of February 27, 2020. And by gap funding, I mean what this money was to do is to take a project that was on the state priority list that was already planned, but the district didn't have sufficient bonding capacity to build it out. And this money was to fill that gap between the district's bonding capacity and what it took to actually start construction on the project. So the commission's role was important, but it was largely ministerial because House Bill 556 already identified the projects that would be funded by reference to the list that has it existed, the priority list on February 27th of 2020. After the commission gathered all of the needed information to specifically identify those districts, the commission met on June 2nd, and has been indicated, the commission voted to extend additional offers of assistance to 13 Kentucky school districts. Ultimately, 12 of those districts accepted. Now, those offers, and this is important to note as well, those offers were expressly conditioned on actual availability of federal funds. And if memory serves, that actually was put in the written notice of the conditional offer of assistance that went to the district. I'm sure that can be produced and verified. As time went on, we continued to receive no final federal guidance from the U.S. Treasury Department. The guidance had been promised to be delivered sometime in the summer. As of June 2nd, I think there was still optimism in all circles that this money would be available and that these projects would proceed as envisioned by House Bill 556. But as time went on and there were continued communications with the Department of Treasury with no satisfactory conclusion, we did become increasingly concerned about this delay. So in an effort to keep the districts informed as to the status of this appropriation, we convened Zoom calls, as I recall, on July 26. If my memory serves, I think we may have had 2 of them so that to try to make sure everybody from each affected district could attend. And the message we delivered during those calls was that we were still awaiting the final federal guidance from the Treasury Department, but that the delay was causing some concern about when these funds would be available, or even if the funds would be available for that purpose, even though we had all contemplated that that would be the case. Obviously, the General Assembly contemplated that as well. But we convened those calls in order to keep the districts up to date and also to let them know that because of this uncertainty, it might not be wise to spend resources on these projects that were already on the drawing board as of February 27, 2020. We were concerned that they might go out and hire design professionals and that sort of thing. And we were, again, increasingly concerned about the absence of the federal guidance. So that was the meeting that we had on July 26 with these districts. The final guidance ultimately was received, as Mr. Hicks noted, in September of this year from the U.S. Treasury Department. That was a 20-page document of some complexity. So we went about doing an analysis of that as extensively and accurately as we could. And we concluded, and we were disappointed to do so, but we concluded that the 12 school projects would not likely meet the criteria for funding from this particular source of federal money because of the way that the federal Treasury guidance was constructed. In particular, the guidance indicated that a project, in order to be eligible for funding, must meet three criteria, must meet all three of these criteria. It must directly advance work, education, and healthcare monitoring. And the guidance was surprisingly, at least to me, it was surprising, clearly slanted toward broadband projects. I don't believe that most people would discern that from the language of the congressional appropriation, but that's how the Treasury guidance was constructed when it was finally received in September. The guidance specifically notes that unlike broadband projects, school projects are not presumed to be eligible. The guidance also requires that projects to be eligible must address an issue or solve a problem that was brought about by the COVID pandemic or was brought to light by the COVID pandemic. Well, in terms of trying to relate that to these 12 school projects, it seems very unlikely that we could either meet that criterion, because the 12 projects that were funded in accordance with House Bill 556 were on the drawing board and on the state priority list prior to the COVID pandemic. We were funding projects that existed on February 27, 2020, and had been assigned a certain priority by the Kentucky Department of Education. So based on that analysis, we held another meeting with the affected school districts a few weeks ago. We told those districts that we were disappointed to have to report that the Treasury guidance had been received, and that based on our analysis, that these projects were unlikely to qualify for funding from that pot of federal money. We also informed these districts that Governor Beshear believed that these were very important projects and that he fully supported that these projects be completed, and that he intended to work with the General Assembly to identify additional sources of funding so that these projects could proceed as quickly as possible. And I think Director Hicks has worked very hard, and I think an additional or alternative source of funds has been identified. But throughout this process, we first communicated to these districts that these offers of assistance were conditioned, of course, upon actual availability of the federal funding. And as that funding was called into question, by the delay from the Treasury Department, we communicated with those districts that we were concerned about that, and that it would perhaps be unwise to begin spending money on those projects until the situation was clarified. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Mr. Hicks.
Yeah, thanks, Secretary Harvey. Wanted to close our testimony with a description of the governor's recommended solution to this problem. We want to address this problem and achieve the intended aims of the original appropriations to do in the following way. We want to switch the appropriation of the $127 million to the School Facilities Construction Commission for these 12 projects from the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund to the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund. This will require action by the General Assembly. And let me explain. One of the eligible uses of the State Fiscal Recovery Fund is for something termed revenue losses, a very complicated calculation that each state will take with the funds that can be directed to eligible governmental services. Based on our preliminary calculation of revenue loss as of December 31, 2020, required by the federal guidance, the Commonwealth will have approximately $220 million that will be eligible to be used for the provision of governmental services. One example of governmental services in the federal guidance is pay-go or cash funding of capital projects. which fits with the planned $127 million in school construction projects. Alternatively, the use of the $127 million for broadband deployment projects from the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund also fits with that fund's eligible uses. So the governor's recommendation is to basically swap. We subtract $127 million from the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund and shift it over to the other fund for school projects. And we do the reverse for the broadband projects so that the same amount of money appropriated by the General Assembly still is intact, but simply switches the two sources of funding, which will require action by the General Assembly. And the governor would encourage that this is an action that can take place in the early days of the 22 regular session because it has no other impact related to the other parts of the budget. So we hope we can work together to accomplish this purpose. Everybody agrees on the ends that we want to meet. And now we have an alternative way to get there that subscribes to the recent federal guidance.
Very good. Thank you, Director Hicks. Just a couple questions, and we've got several other questions in line here. There was a couple times you mentioned about in Governor Beshear's letter when he talked to Secretary Yelling and Mr. Sperling and made reference to possibly maybe the guidance is a little bit different from the federal legislation and the law that was passed. Could you touch on that again? Is it the administration's opinion that maybe there's been the president and the president's administration and the guidance has done some rewriting of this measure? Is that y'all's opinion? Or I heard it a couple times and I just wanted to see if you could re-explain that again.
Sure, be glad to. No, I don't think there's any question that we disagree with the approach that the U.S. Treasury Department made with the guidance, or at least portions of the guidance. Now, at the time, our only inkling that there was a concerning issue with the plans that we had in Kentucky was this statement of purpose and process that they issued back in May that, again, was only kind of a first prologue to ultimately what we would learn. That's when we found out or saw that maybe they were focusing on internet connectivity and broadband with this project rather than what we were reading in the federal statute. So that was what prompted the conversations with the federal officials in Washington was, we were kind of reading between the lines of what may be coming down the pipe. And we wanted to impress upon those officials, one, how we were seeing it here in Kentucky, how the administration, the General Assembly saw it, and what you already did, took action, appropriation specifically for these efforts, and we shared that with them. And so no, I don't think I can have any problem saying that we disagree with the approach they ultimately took with the guidance, as Secretary Harvey explained in detail. But we kind of but at the time it is what it is, and we've got another solution to come up with it. But we were disappointed. And the governor, way ahead of the guidance, expressed his strong concerns.
Right. So there's not any other possibilities of any pushback from the administration from Kentucky's point of view, possibly legal action or anything of that nature that would help get some more clarity to this? Or is, in your opinion, is the answer in the guidance the answer?
Yeah, we think that the guidance is final. And so we don't expect any adjustments to be made, to the guidance. They did not choose the path of having the equivalent of a proposed administrative reg and then a comment period, and then the final reg. So this is guidance, and it is Treasury. It's our understanding that it's final guidance, and so that's why we began looking for another way to resolve the problem.
Okay. Very good. We have a couple more questions. Representative Blanton is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hicks, we've been talking about 12 different school districts that's impacted here. We obviously know that Bath County is one of those. Could you please, because there are people watching online and on KET, could you please give us the list of the 12 districts that are not going to be receiving this money this money?
Representative Blanton, I'll yield to Secretary Harvey. He has that information.
Those districts, I believe, are Martin County, Floyd County, Boyd County, Bellevue, Mayfield, Jackson, Grant County, Breckenridge, Bath, Cumberland, Pendleton, and Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is actually one question I was going to ask. Of the 13 districts that were offered support, which district did not accept the offer of support?
I believe, and I'm subject to correction, but I believe it was Hart County. And there can, as I've learned, there can be any number of reasons why a district might do that. Again, this was never funding that was offered to completely build a project. This is funding that is offered when a district has a project on the facility priority list and it has some bonding capacity, but not enough to fully build the project. So this funding fills that gap, as it were. So that's, there could be any number of reasons why a district's priority might have changed. And again, I think it's important to remember that House Bill 556 did not contemplate, it was not a situation where the appropriation was made in 556 and then school districts said, well, let's see what we can do with that money. The appropriation made by the General Assembly was to fill the gap for projects that were already on the drawing board, that were already on the facilities plan priority list as of February 27, 2020. That's an important fact to keep in mind.
Thank you. And for any of the members who are interested, I actually have a copy of all the districts, all the schools, how much their local bonding capacity is, and how much the grant would be for each individual school. Reach out to me, and I'll be glad to send that to you. Director Hicks, I just want clarification. Of course, we appropriated quite a bit of the ARPA money that the state had in the last session. Do we have approximately $1 billion left to appropriate?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, this $127 million, we're not using additional ARPA money. We're just changing the account. I want to make sure I understand this. We're just changing the account that we're appropriating this money to so it can be utilized for this purpose. Am I correct in my understanding?
You are correct.
Thank you.
Senator Wheeler has a question remotely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, Budget Director Hicks, I represent Martin County, which is probably one of the poorest rural counties in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I think we've heard today some of the other challenges these facilities are facing in terms of mold and ventilation problems. Although many of these projects were already on the books, some of the problems that they were facing, it seems to me, bear directly with safety measures that might also have to do with COVID, particularly, kids getting clean air, being in a safe facility where they're not exposed to the hazards of the virus. To what extent did the administration attempt to advocate for these projects in the sense that they would also be applicable to COVID-related measures, even though they were already on the books?
Representative Hicks, Director Hicks.
But I would add, Secretary Harvey had recounted, we both did, very, significant analysis of reading the guidance, and we agree with the statements you've made. I mean, there's no question that it's related to public health, but it may not be related to health monitoring. And in combination, to have a facility that also combines work and education, well, education's easy, right? These are school projects, and health monitoring. And then some of the other elements that he described is why we think, it is, extremely unlikely, to be approved under those guidance. And so again, that's why we pivot, to another, solution, that can be done, here in a couple of months, and again, doesn't have any negative effects on any other part of the budget.
And I would say that, and I'd be happy to have I suppose, a fuller discussion about what's in the federal guidance. But when we analyzed the final guidance, I mean, we were looking for ways to cause our projects to be qualified. At the end of the day, it seemed to us that it was extremely unlikely that the projects could qualify under this guidance, and that attempting to do so would create, in all likelihood, much more delay with disappointment at the end of the road. But I think we certainly agree with your observation that these are vitally important projects, that these are projects that should be built and completed. And Governor Beshear has proposed a plan that will do just that if the General Assembly agrees.
Mr. Chairman, if I might be permitted a brief follow-up.
Yes, please.
To what extent would, say, construction of newer facilities like vocational schools with perhaps a healthcare-oriented bent, industrial cleaning or pre-nursing degrees, would such facilities be available for new construction under the federal guidance?
That I want to be careful not to speculate too much because this guidance is rather complicated, but I suspect that now that the guidance is out, that it would be possible to design something, a facility like you are suggesting. If you designed it specifically to hit all of the bogeys that are included in the guidance, then yes, you could probably get there. But it's clear from the guidance that it does not favor the construction of school projects. Again, the guidance goes to some pains to specifically say that school projects are not categorically presumed to be eligible, whereas broadband projects are. But with that said, if you sat down with a blank sheet of paper and you designed a project that was designed around this criteria, I'm sure you could get there.
And I would add to Secretary Harvey that when you get an opportunity, page 6 of that guidance, lines out exactly what Secretary Harvey just said. When could a full service community school project be an eligible use of these funds? And so at least the guidance provides some path to an example like you were expressing. And so I just commend to take a look at, because that's under a category that they've labeled multi-purpose community facility projects. They laid out several examples of what is possible: a full service community school, even a library or a community health center. So they're, as Secretary Harvey said, they've diagrammed out what might be possible in that arena.
Senator Alvarado has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. I can tell you as a Kentuckian, it pains me to know that we have a governor that doesn't have very much influence with a White House that he endorsed or with a Congress that's controlled by his own party. What a difference 2.5 years make here in Kentucky. Let me ask you also, Director, I know you just mentioned a solution here, and you talked about switching the appropriations of ARPA funds, and you said that we will have approximately $220 million eligible to be used. How did you come up with that amount of $220 million?
The federal guidance on that's the coronavirus state fiscal recovery fund is the $2.1 billion that we were allocated. Has a very specific set of calculations that states and cities can make in order to calculate what is a revenue loss under their requirements. And so our controller's office here with the Finance and Administration Cabinet took that particular information and did those calculations, and those calculations are based at the end of each calendar year. So we had a calendar year ending December of 2020, and based upon the use of the required information, that was the result. And every state and city government has been going through this calculation to see what it yields. And so the flexibility that the guidance provides, when you come up with that figure, such as I was describing, pay-go capital projects like we're talking about with the schools, is one of the many uses that could be provided with that part of the state fiscal recovery fund.
So we have an ability to switch around funds and use those for purposes. When did you come up with those numbers? Approximately when did you all have an idea that you could use those extra funds, or that the General Assembly could reappropriate those funds for that purpose?
Let's see, the guidance came out on that in May of 2021. So soon after we read that and got the particulars, that's when we, took to doing the calculation.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Chairman, if you give me a little bit of leeway here. I'm going to read you some comments, Director, from an article written September the 22nd of 2021. The article is titled, "Why Andy Beshear is Resisting GOP's Call for a Special Session to Pay for Doctors and Nurses," written by Joe Sonka with the Courier-Journal. And in that article, talks about how I've been advocating, I think, very publicly about using $81 million of ARPA funds to help with our retention and recruitment of nurses and all kinds of medical therapists and critical care personnel. And when they asked the governor why we couldn't do that, I'll quote his remarks here. He said that all but the $69 million of the ARPA funds received by Kentucky had already been appropriated for other purposes, regardless of what was sent to Senate Republicans before the session, with state government not receiving the final $1.1 billion of ARPA funds until the middle of next year. Quote, "This is accounting, right? The dollars are either in the bank or they're not," Beshear said, "and the General Assembly has appropriated every dollar of ARPA funds that we have." And he goes on, I can read you the entire article, you can look it up for yourself, but it talks about how I said, hey, we can reappropriate funds to help find money for this, and his response was no, there's no more money available. And he made several public statements in September after our special session saying that there's no money available. So Director Hicks, are you lying to me here today, or did the governor lie to us back in September? That's my question for you.
Well, I would respond to say that the proposed uses you described would not fit into the definition of governmental services, for which I was describing what are the eligible uses of the revenue loss component of the state fiscal recovery fund. So I would say that no one is lying here. The governor, indicated that, and the other limitation that the General Assembly put on the use of these funds is that the coronavirus capital projects fund or the coronavirus state fiscal recovery fund, there could be no uses unless appropriated by the General Assembly. So that is, that would be my response.
Yeah, thank you, Director. I don't agree with your response. I think it's clear what you're asking us to do is reappropriate funds, shift ARPA money from one section to another. I think they can be used. The same thing I was arguing to do back in during our special session and since then. And the response from the governor is we can't do that. So clearly we can, at least if you're telling us the truth today, that we can do those things. And I appreciate that because I think that authority stands within this group that's listening to this testimony today. But I'd suggest perhaps that you get together with your boss, with the governor, and have some discussions to determine which direction you want to go. Instead of giving us mixed messages, giving the press mixed messages, you can see how frustrating this can be for us. Because this governor has been wrong about plenty of things throughout his administration. Things that he thought he was right on legally, only to have our Supreme Court throw in his face and say you're absolutely wrong. He thought he was clear about what funds could be used, again, clearly wrong. It gets difficult to trust an administration that's wrong so often. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And before we leave the subject of this calculated loss, when I read the governor's 4-page response, I don't know if anybody else was caught off guard, but to say that we had a loss when we have record revenues, record rainy day funds, are we 100% sure that we're calculating this loss correctly to where we're not coming back here in 6 months from now and saying, whoops, we miscalculated this loss and now we can't use this money? Are we real confident about the guidance on that?
Oh yes, we're very, very confident. There was some provision in that in the calculation guidance that was provided that gave a state or a city a presumption of past revenue growth pre-pandemic. That for many state and local governments, provided an ability to calculate a revenue loss under their guidance. You're correct in terms of the general perception of what happened to state tax revenues. That's an accurate statement. But given the way that they allowed the calculation to occur, it did come up with a revenue loss, and we're very confident about that figure.
Okay. Very good. We have a few more questions, gentlemen. Senator Southworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions, if I can. My first question is these funds, this $220 million revenue loss, that all these funds have this almost the same exact name, so I get mixed up sometimes on which money we're talking about. But is it my understanding that the $220 million is part of a greater whole, and 220 is the calculated part of that whole? And if that's the case, what is the whole? What all those funds could be used for? Because revenue loss is an option, but it's not necessarily that we have to take it. Am I all correct on that? And then what the funds all could be used for?
Sorry. Yes, Senator, you are correct. The 220 is a part of the state fiscal recovery fund. And that's the $2.1 billion that the Commonwealth received, of which about $1.1 billion the General Assembly appropriated in the 2021 session. And so the 220 becomes a potential use of the remaining $1 billion that Representative Tipton alluded to earlier.
And is the $1.1 billion that we appropriated, that includes or does not include the broadband program that we did like 350 out of?
It does include the $300 million for the broadband, the $250 million for water, wastewater, and the $572 million for repayment of the federal unemployment insurance loan, and a few other smaller items.
So the 220 revenue loss that we could technically calculate is just about a cover for the fact that we want to appropriate $200 more million out of our $1 billion left to appropriate. Is that correct?
Well, in this case, the governor is suggesting to use $127 million of that 220 to resolve this issue with the school projects.
So 127 out of the billion that we still have to do. It's basically the billion sitting there on the shelf for next session. 127 million of it will be for this project since the last money didn't work, and we will undo 127 of the broadband. So at the end of the day, we're still going to be left with the billion on the table for next session if you do the math. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
So I understand sometimes it's easier to work with people that are local instead of far away. I just wanted to get an idea, because you did mention earlier this solution maybe is less trouble than what it could be, but I wanted to go back and review, and Senator Wheeler started into this on the actual allowed uses for these funds relating to the fall through with the school issue. In the letter that the governor wrote, and I know the guidance is more detailed, but it does quote from the guidance. So it says, addressing a critical need, here he is quoting from the guidance, a critical need that resulted from or was made apparent or exacerbated by the COVID-19. And I wanted to highlight, because I feel like what hasn't really come out yet, and Senator Wheeler started into it, and I hope, and I don't know for sure if the administration is 100% aware, but a lot of these schools in these communities, I'm not speaking for every single community on this list, but I'm thinking there's a number of communities out there like this that aren't even on this list, that this guidance would for sure cover in much better detail than we're covering it today. We're talking about schools, and when we think of schools, we typically think of the schools in our districts wherever we live, because those are the schools that we're most familiar with, or the schools we attended if we attended a different school. But I wanted to highlight the work that I've done in areas such as Bath County in that area, where these are students who, more than other students in other areas of the state, don't have internet connections at home. They, in many cases, don't have healthcare services in their county, or very many of them. And the school is a very core component of not only, and it's also the largest employer in a lot of these counties, if not all of them. And so when we're talking about enabling work, certainly I know education is not even a debatable. But when we're talking about health monitoring, we just passed this test and stay thing, and it kind of went toward the issue of who is keeping an eye on our children's health throughout the days, weeks, months, and years. Typically, it's a school nurse, more than anyone else. Who is and how are we enabling work in the county? Well, usually that means driving to the school parking lot and using the Wi-Fi. And we had a lot of hotspots and different things in the community trying to solve some of these issues during the COVID pandemic. And the issues that were made apparent or exacerbated were things like people are going to the school not only for education, they're going to the school for internet access. They're going to school for healthcare access. They're going to the school for a lot of things similar to the public library, which was listed on this. People are going to the public library for internet access. They're going to the public library to find a job. It's not normally the place we think of to go to find a job, but that's where they're going. There's a lot of multi-purpose uses when you have a small community, especially in a rural area, where I don't know that Washington, D.C. understands that. And sometimes it concerns me that some of our more urban areas in this state don't understand that either, and I want to make sure that comes out in this discussion. And I understand that the effort that would be required to get them to understand that, and then the question of whether it's, clear and convincing evidence enough for the federal guidance to say, okay, yes, you qualify for the case-by-case basis, compared to the swap-a-roo that we can pull off over here, might be more effort than it's worth. I hear that, but I want to make sure that everybody understands we're not just talking about a school. And whereas in February 2020, maybe they needed this building, what I heard was Bath County needed a building. Now they changed their plan to remodel their old building. What changed? COVID is one reason. So I want to get a better, clearer idea of how much the administration thinks the effort has been made or could be made to advocate for our rural communities at the national level.
No, I appreciate your description. In fact, after we received in May that statement, of purpose and process, we began thinking in that very way: is how might one of these school renovation projects, fit that? Now, we didn't have the guidance yet about the multi-purpose community facility project, so we were speculating in a similar format that you did. I'm very familiar with a number of school buildings in Kentucky that serve as adult education and literacy providers as a location. We're very familiar with schools in Kentucky that do career and technical and vocational training. And some of those schools even open in the evening in order to provide adults, with that training because of their capacities in their technical schools. And in health monitoring, you described the school nurse, but there could be situations where schools partner with the local health department to periodically, have health monitoring and other efforts, using the community's school, as a physical location. So we certainly gave that, some thought in anticipation of the guidance. And in the end, we were concerned about the risk of trying to maybe shoehorn a project that didn't have those intended scopes into this. And so that was why we kind of pivoted, to the other solution, though a lot of what you say is similar to the thinking that we had about, meeting the statutory language, that we read back in March of 2020.
Representative McCormick has a question. Online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My point that I want to make is to Mr. Harvey and Mr. Hicks. As a representative of Martin County, I'm very disappointed in what has taken place. Secondly, it is critical that you all do what you can to correct this situation. And I would appreciate it if you would keep me informed as I can keep our local people informed of what's taken place. Thank you.
I would just say that obviously we too are disappointed with the result and the conclusion to be drawn from the final federal guidance. And again, the governor and Director Hicks have formulated a plan that will result in these very important projects being completed. And so there is a solution on the table, and I certainly hope that these projects move forward with alacrity.
Co-chair,
Thank you.
Co-chair Miller has a question or comment.
Director Hicks, thanks for being here. And I apologize, this isn't directly related to the topic, but it is ARPA related. Representative Bratcher and I have 2 Chapter 75 fire districts that offer EMS services. And in that role, they've had a lot of cost related to COVID. They have had impacts to their revenue, plus they provided the standby EMS services for the mega site, for vaccine mega site, yet they are not eligible for Metro's allocation of ARPA funds. These fire districts have submitted requests to the Beshear administration for ARPA funds to offset that money, that lost revenue and added cost because of all the expenses related to COVID and providing standby EMS services for the mega site. Have you all reviewed their request, and will it be a part of your budget coming up?
Thank you, Representative Miller. I won't try to predict what's part of our budget coming up. I am familiar with the example that you mentioned, and in fact, had a brief discussion with those 2 fire districts, some time back prior to their submitting, the letter, to the governor. Is I was trying to understand their situation. So, we were really talking about, possible eligible uses of the state fiscal recovery fund against what they were describing as, pretty much the costs, that they had been enduring, as a result of the COVID and their response to it. So we are familiar with it. And I don't want to diminish their request. It was very important. We've received lots of requests, I will say, in the last several months, aiming at that remaining $1 billion. And so, going to be a lot of, decisions to make for very legitimate purposes.
Right, because from your earlier testimony, it seems like this fits very well in terms of lost revenue and increased cost specifically related to COVID, such as staffing the vaccine megasite. So I urge you to favorably look upon that request. Thank you.
Okay, we have one other part of our meeting. We had invited Ms. Chelsea Couch, the Executive Director for the School Facilities Construction Commission, to the meeting, and she was the author of one of the letters that communicated some information to our superintendents, and I'd just like to ask Ms. Couch if she had anything else to add to help our understanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Can you all hear me? Okay. I don't have anything to add. The letter that I sent, we were in constant communication with these districts, trying to keep them apprised of what was going on as much as I could. We were as transparent as I think we possibly could have been. The last letter was a request. When our last Zoom conference, a superintendent requested so that he could give something physical to his local board. So that's why that letter went out.
Representative Tipton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're going to get tired of me asking you questions. Basically, it's the same question. I thought it would be beneficial for this committee to hear that. And the question is, how much unmet school facility need is there in the state of Kentucky?
That report just came out, and there's a little over $6 billion in unmet need for school facilities in the Commonwealth.
Wow. Very good. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hicks and Commissioner Harvey, are you still on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
Yes, sir.
Very good. I believe that is all of our questions, and I just want to thank you for answering these questions. You know, these are tough questions, but to be honest with you, you know, we're asking because we need to be informed. And when we start getting calls and concerns from schools of major construction funds lost, it's just important for us to know, as the representatives and people closest to our community, what's going on. And I think that's the point of our meeting today is we need more communication, not less, and we need to make sure that we're spending money properly. And, you know, we believe it was our position to appropriate these funds, and we want to see them spent the way that we appropriate them. And we need to be involved if there are changes involved in that. So thank you so much. Are there any other questions today for Director Hicks or the Commissioner? Thank you so much, sir. I'm going to kind of make an executive decision here. Representative Miller's bills that are on our agenda, he is going to be presenting those bills to PPOB in about an hour and is required to do that. So just if you get a chance to look at these pension bills that will be coming forward in the next session, we'll let Representative Miller present those to PPOB. Is there any other information or discussion that needs to come before our committee today? Hold on just a second. Let me dig. Something very important here. We've had state government is actually staffed by quite a few folks that do the work behind the scenes, and I want to just make sure that we thank our staff members. Alicia Miller to my right is the committee staff administrator, Michael Collin, Daniel Carter, Kevin Delvin, Brad Gross, Jennifer Haynes, Karen Powell, Andrew Salmon, Sharon Tubbs, Angela Rhodes, and Peggy Chantarelli. I still hadn't learned Peggy's name, how to pronounce it. But let's give them a round of applause and thank them for their help. Thank you. Very good. If there are no other business, is there a motion to adjourn? Is it second? All in favor, say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.